Hey, my name is Ben Hutton, and you're joining us for JSON Schema in Production, where we talk to individuals working with JSON Schema in real life situations. So today we have with us Jans Neuse, a founder of Wundergraph, to talk about how they're using JSON Schema in production today. Welcome, Jans. How are you doing?
Hi, James. Thanks for having me.
Great to see you today. Why don't we kick off with you telling us a little bit about who you are and what makes you tick?
Yeah, I'm Jens, the founder of Wundergraph, and deeply care about improving the developer experience of working with APIs. And that's also why I started working on Wundergraph as a side project. And then over the years, turned that into an actual company. And so we're still very early stages. But yeah, that's current situation.
Mm-hmm. So what were you doing before you started Wundergraph? How did you sort of get into something? You said you've been working with APIs, but could you maybe unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, so early in my career, I started my first startup, which didn't work out so well, but it helped me learn a lot about software development. So I was able to build native and mobile apps. So I learned about Android and iOS, and I learned to build websites and backend services. And so when I learned about all that, obviously your mobile app, your services, your backend, they all have to communicate with each other. So I also had to learn a lot about APIs and how to integrate with them and how do you handle authentication and all that kind of stuff. And that really got me hooked. So I went away from consumer facing products and wanted to dive more into building dev tooling to improve that developer experience. So that's how I got into the API space.
Okay, yeah, definitely. I can understand that. Particularly as there are more third-party integrations and software now. I can see how Wundergraph is looking to provide that value in terms of being able to have a single coherent approach to calling all of the different APIs and making that developer experience easier. Does that kind of sum up what sort of Wundergraph is looking to achieve, do you think?
Yeah, should we maybe briefly talk about like the history or early days, or what's the core ideas behind why I started Wundergraph?
Yeah. Give us the story of how that sort of happened for you and where you are today. That'd be really useful.
So I would say like 4 or 5 years ago, I was an engineering manager for German's largest news website, which is t-online.de. And that news, if you think about a news website, it's not just a wall of articles and stuff, but you have various heterogeneous systems behind such a site. Like you have the content management system where the reporters work in. You have a lot of third-party APIs where you have data about football, financial data. You have affiliates from Amazon. And even internally, you have various different services that store and expose data through APIs. And so I was responsible for 3 teams. So we had a team for data-driven products. We had a team for the homepage, and we also had a team for mobile apps and stuff. And the biggest challenge we were actually facing is assemble all these APIs together and expose them as one single unified API. So you have, all the different protocols you have to deal with, like SOAP and XML, and then JSON APIs and REST APIs, or not so REST APIs, or REST-ish APIs, and you have someone builds something in gRPC, and then you have all these heterogeneous systems. And the front-end developer says, hey, I want to build a new page or a new product, and I need data from those 3 services. So should the front end talk to all these different protocols, or should it be the backend? And then we decided to build our own new REST API to assemble all that. And at this time, I was thinking, like, wouldn't be there, or couldn't be there a simpler way where you can say, hey, I have 30 services. Here's the specification, like a protobuf for gRPC, SOAP, WSDL, or OpenAPI, or JSON Schema for a JSON API. And you could feed all those specifications into a system, and the system assembles it into one coherent, or gives you one coherent view, and lets you talk one language to that system. And that's the core idea behind Wundergraph. So with Wundergraph, you can talk GraphQL to all your systems. So that means, as a developer who builds against such a system, you don't talk to 30 services. You talk to one service that speaks one language, and that removes a whole lot of problems and context switching, and it just makes development easier. So that's why I started building Wundergraph.
Yeah, I can definitely appreciate that. I worked in the news agency type application, but in my last job, I worked on a scientific service, and we pulled in data from many services, must be 30 or 40 different services. And sometimes, their idea of an API is, oh, you FTP download this file, and then you try and process it, and that's just that can be a lot of fun too. Yeah. So yeah, definitely understand the challenges involved in doing that sort of work where you're trying to pull in data from many sources. So yeah, I can definitely understand that value, and I can see how that's really useful. Yeah, thank you. So you're building this system to basically save developers a heck of a lot of time interfacing with all these different types of APIs. What was the challenge as you were building the system which led to you looking for something like JSON Schema?
Great question. So if you think about the approach that I took, so the initial idea was, I want to have a single unified GraphQL API to talk to all my systems. So over the last couple of years, I was working a lot in the GraphQL space, creating a lot of open source repositories. I also implemented the GraphQL specification with Go. So my main stack for the backend is Golang. So I implemented the spec myself in Go. And what I realized is this, like, GraphQL has this dynamic character that you can specify whatever data you want, writing a query, mutation, or a subscription, depending on what's the mode you want to operate. But what I found is that in production, actually most applications, they have some kind of transpile or compile time step. And after this step, when you deploy into production, you're never going to change the queries or the GraphQL operations that you previously wrote. So which means when you develop, you create new queries and new mutations. And when you ship that into production, you don't change them anymore. So there's this question of, if you don't change the queries at runtime, why do you actually need them in the client? Because in this compile time step, you already know that this client is going to send such and such a query, and this is the data you want to get back. And if you think about the power of GraphQL, you dig a bit deeper into the ecosystem, you also realize that with GraphQL in production, there comes a lot of complexity. Like, how do you secure a GraphQL API? How do you make sure that a client doesn't query what they shouldn't query? Or how do you make sure that they don't write a query that's too complex, that in the end leads to hundreds or thousands of REST API calls that are behind this one query? With REST, you can have like a rate limiter for an endpoint. With GraphQL, you have just one endpoint, and the rate limiting factor, it needs to look into the query. So over the last couple of years, I was building a lot of software to build API gateways and secure GraphQL. And one thing I realized is, why, or do we really have to secure GraphQL if we don't change queries at runtime? And there's some public APIs that expose GraphQL, like GitHub, for example. They definitely want to expose GraphQL, but I think it's a niche use case. Most of the time, like how, for example, Facebook does it and many other companies like Airbnb and others, they don't change queries at runtime. So what you can actually do is, and this is where I had this Eureka moment of realizing like the power of JSON schema is, let's say from a developer workflow, you're building a new feature. You write 3 GraphQL queries. And if you analyze a GraphQL query, what you see is a GraphQL query essentially is a function that takes an input and it has an output. And because GraphQL in most implementations speaks JSON, what you can do is you can say, okay, a GraphQL query is essentially a function that takes a JSON as an input and also has a JSON as an output. So if you think about this, you build your 3 queries and you don't change them at runtime. What you can actually do is you can compile them into an RPC endpoint, and you can analyze the JSON, the query, and you can create a JSON schema for the input and a JSON schema for the output. So essentially, what 99% of all companies should be doing with GraphQL is, except like GitHub and 3 others who expose the GraphQL API, or yeah, I think they should be doing this, is when they move GraphQL into production, they should compile it into JSON RPC and create JSON schemas for each RPC endpoint, because it gives you a whole lot of opportunities to integrate with other tooling. You can leverage the ecosystem, for example, for Go. There's a bunch of JSON schema validation libraries. So I personally didn't have to reinvent input validation. When the client sends the input, I can now run it through this JSON schema validation middleware, and that makes sure that we don't put the wrong input into the GraphQL query execution. So that's kind of how we landed from GraphQL to, or we went from GraphQL to JSON RPC, and how we're using JSON schema.
Yeah, and I can definitely understand the value in that. I mean, it kind of sounds a bit like stored procedures at the database layer. You got to create that. If you know what your queries are going to be ahead of time, you can save yourself a lot of time and effort, and even performance. And then you can do so in a secure way as well. Yeah, definitely.
I actually see a lot of similarities with, databases have prepared statements, and it's actually very similar to what we're doing, just that we don't have tables. For Wundergraph, the tables are origins, and those could be heterogeneous systems that talk different API styles. And that's how I think about this.
Yeah, no, it's definitely an analogy that comes to mind as you're talking and describing it. I know I previously used a lot of stored procedures and custom views and new versions of Postgres that have been very, very successful and very easy to use in a big system that's has a lot of very difficult data to process. Certainly saves us a lot of time developing the application at different layers and compartmentalizing the challenges, I think, separating those concerns out, which makes developers' lives easier. There's when you can limit the concerns to specific realms, the context, it makes things a lot easier. So in terms of JSON schema, as a solution for this problem, did you look at different alternatives, and what sort of landed you on JSON schema?
Actually, not like I don't even know if there's alternative ways. Like initially, I was thinking like, okay, how can I make sure that some data that is coming from the client, how can I validate it? And for a brief moment, I was thinking of writing something to do it on my own.
Mm-hmm.
But I realized that there's actually a large ecosystem to handle JSON schema. For example, like one part of Wundergraph is written in TypeScript, another part is written in Go. So if I build my own solution, I now would have to implement something in TypeScript and in Go. And it's not core, like, you know, like input validation, it's not core to Wundergraph's business. It's we need a solution, but I always try to spend most of my time in something that's close to where the biggest value of Wundergraph is, and that's integrating APIs. It's not validating something. So we can leverage this enormous ecosystem. And you know, I had one, like there was like this Eureka moment where I realized this is it's a great solution, because once again, as I said before, we create JSON RPC endpoints that have a JSON schema spec for input and response. And then I was thinking about, okay, how can I make it easy for people to use this? So what I built is I built a code generator that generates React hooks, so that you can simply use a generated React hook to call the JSON RPC method you previously created. And then I was thinking, okay, if I want to show a demo to a prospect, I don't want to spend a whole lot of time to build a user interface. So I was thinking about how can I make better demos? How can I code faster when doing a demo? And what I realized is there's actually libraries. You take a JSON schema, you hand it to the library, and it can create a form for you. And this was like, I was blown away, because it means I take 5 different services, assemble them with Wundergraph, then I write a GraphQL query or a mutation, and I generate a form. So actually, by writing a GraphQL query, I created a secure JSON RPC endpoint that has JSON schema validation on the server and generates me a form on the client. And even before the client sends the form, you can already validate it in the client, because there's also JavaScript libraries to validate JSON schema. So, I mean, how many things can you automate? This is such a cool ecosystem to leverage. Like if I did this on my own, like nobody would build a form generator for Wundergraph JSON validation thing, you know?
Yeah, I think it's been really great to see how the community stepped up and found all these different uses for JSON schema. There's ongoing work to try and standardize these parts, because I know that, for example, the form generation is all custom. Each library has its own custom understanding of particular situations, and it has some limitations, and we're looking to enable that to be standardized. And you're talking, how many different things can we do? We're looking into database generation, database layer validation as well. So you can create a more zero trust environment across different services. If you have another database that it's not managed by Wundergraph that you want to insert the data into, if that can accept a JSON schema, it knows how to build the tables, but also do the validation as well.
Yeah. And there's also another thing, and that is when you look into the GraphQL community, what the GraphQL people love to say that GraphQL is type safe. And to some degree, that's true. So in GraphQL, for example, when you have an input, you can say this field must be a number and this field must be a string. It's not too bad. Like, we have some typing. But if you compare that, for example, to OpenAPI, which leverages JSON schema, you can do so much more powerful things. You can say this string should be a URL, or you can define various rules to apply, like keys in a slice or array should be unique or something. You know, I mean, I don't have to tell you about how JSON schema works, but essentially, if you compare GraphQL to OpenAPI or JSON schema, there's some features missing. And now coming back to the solution we've built, if you put those JSON RPC endpoints on top of your GraphQL layer, you can actually combine it. You can have input validation, where you say at the JSON RPC layer, this field must be a domain or a URL or something. And that puts a layer of security in front of your GraphQL layer. So I think that's a real nice benefit, because we can extend input validation of GraphQL without having to change GraphQL.
Yeah, definitely. I think, you know, one of the things that's good about GraphQL that JSON schema doesn't really do very well is it's really built for, you know, enabling code generation, client generation, and that's one of the things why it's type safe. And JSON schema, yeah, definitely adds a lot of validation, but the code generation side of things, it's not really specified, and it's another one of those areas where people do it and they make it work as long as they understand the potential pitfalls, or their schemas aren't too complex.
Yeah.
You know, there's some horrendously complex schemas, and good luck generating you know, your class definitions from that. You're never going to do that automatically.
Yeah.
But it's one of the things, again, that we want to try and standardize. So that's, yeah, I can see how that's been really beneficial, and in terms of enabling you to build faster, but then also demo faster. And that's, you know, got to be impressive to clients that you're looking to bring in. How do you think it's impacted what you're able to do internally, in terms of, you know, what sort of confidence does it give you to make you able to move faster in terms of releasing new features? Or is it more of a benefit for the actual day-to-day working of the application itself?
So I would say it's three core aspects. So initially, it's obviously super fast time to market, because we didn't have to reinvent so many wheels, and we could leverage the existing ecosystem. So time to market is one factor. Second factor I see is actually confidence in terms of security. So we're helping customers build an API layer. So they expose their APIs through Wundergraph, and I want to make this trustful. So I can now use libraries that implement JSON schema validation that are open source, that are well recognized in the ecosystem, have a lot of stars, have some issues on GitHub. You can look into that, and you get a sense of, okay, this library, it's out there for a couple of years. They've implemented such and such JSON schema spec. So it's definitely more trustful than anything I could build myself. So I have a good level of trust in the validation that I'm doing in front of my JSON RPC APIs is very much like, you know, nothing is 100% secure, but it's definitely more secure than anything I could have built myself. And third factor is integration into the ecosystem. So once you have a JSON schema for your RPC endpoints, you can tap into a whole bunch of things, like I just mentioned. There's various libraries that generate forms for your JSON schema endpoints. We also have built another code generator where we use the JSON, or we reuse the JSON schema to generate Postman collections. So once you've created your Wundergraph application, you can also use it from Postman. We could also generate OpenAPI that again leverages JSON schema. So that's what I would say, like the three main factors, like time to market, confidence and security, and leveraging the existing ecosystem.
Yeah, I know people value being able to port it to different systems and make use of things like collections and OpenAPI specifications as well. Particularly, validating that you've done something right in terms of what you created inside your team, and other teams can use that. So I can understand how a big organization or even smaller organization can use that. Of course, and then you can use your collection to generate your documentation and expose your API and make that first time to first call of your API reduced for your customers. I know that's something that is actually really valuable for organizations who have a public API that they're trying to market.
Yeah.
Great. Was there anything else you wanted to sort of bring up at this point?
No, I think we pretty much covered everything I think this is worth mentioning.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Hans, for joining us today. I hope that's been really valuable, and I've certainly learned a lot in terms of what you're doing and the value that Wundergraph provides. So thank you so much for joining us today, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks for having me.
Thanks.
Bye, man.
Bye.